Next up, we're diving into the shocking story of Delta Flight 4819, which crashed and flipped over at Toronto Pearson Airport, leaving all 80 passengers and crew shaken but alive. I'm your host, and today we're going to explore the harrowing details of this incident and what it reveals about air travel safety.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, can you imagine being on a plane that's literally upside down? What was going through the minds of those passengers?
Well, according to eyewitness accounts, passengers like John Nelson and Peter Kukov described the scene as chaotic, with people hanging from their seats like bats. The fact that some passengers were able to exit the plane with their belongings, despite being told to leave them behind, raises questions about the effectiveness of emergency evacuation procedures.
That's a good point. I mean, why would people take their bags with them in a situation like that? Isn't it supposed to be every man for himself?
Exactly. In high-stress situations like this, people often act on instinct, and sometimes that means trying to hold on to personal items. But as we know, evacuation procedures are designed to prioritize speed and safety above all else.
Right. So, what happened with the evacuation process in this case? Were there any issues with the plane's emergency exits or the crew's response?
From what we know, the flight attendants did their best to help passengers evacuate quickly, but it seems that some people still managed to take their bags with them. This could be a concern for future incidents, as personal items can potentially hinder escape efforts.
That makes sense. I've heard stories about how, in emergency situations, people will try to grab their phones or wallets before leaving the scene. It's like, what's going through their minds? Don't they realize that their lives are at risk?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. There are psychological factors at play here, such as the desire for control and the tendency to prioritize personal belongings over safety. We'll need to delve deeper into this aspect of human behavior to better understand how to improve evacuation procedures.
I see what you mean. It's like when people try to grab their stuff during a fire or something. But in a plane crash, it's not just about personal belongings, it's about getting out alive. Do you think this incident will lead to changes in airline safety protocols?
Absolutely. The investigation into this crash will likely examine the evacuation procedures and identify areas for improvement. It's possible that airlines will re-emphasize the importance of leaving personal items behind during emergencies, or even implement new technologies to facilitate faster evacuations.
That would be interesting. I've heard about those inflatable slides they use in emergency landings. Maybe they could develop something like that for evacuations too. What do you think?
Well, it's definitely an area worth exploring. The key is to balance the need for safety with the realities of human behavior. By understanding why people act certain ways in emergency situations, we can design better protocols and train crew members to respond more effectively.
Right, and I guess it's also about passenger education too. If people are aware of the risks and know what to expect in an emergency, they'll be more likely to follow procedures and prioritize their safety.
Exactly. Education and awareness are crucial components of airline safety. By working together, we can reduce the risks associated with air travel and create a safer experience for everyone on board. Now, let's take a closer look at the investigation into this incident and what it might reveal about the causes of the crash. Next up, we're going to dive into the thrilling topic of crash landing, uncovering the truth behind the Delta plane crash in Toronto. I'm your host, and today we're joined by a special guest who's here to help us break down the shocking details of this incident. We'll be exploring the events leading up to the crash, the harrowing experiences of the passengers, and what this means for the future of air travel safety.
Wow, I'm excited to be here. So, let's get straight into it. What happened with the Delta plane crash in Toronto? I mean, I've heard it was a pretty intense scene. Right?
Absolutely. The Delta flight from Minneapolis crashed onto the runway at Toronto Pearson Airport, leaving all 80 passengers and crew members shaken but alive. The aircraft ended up upside down with significant damage to its fuselage and wings. It's a miracle that no one was killed in the accident.
That's that's just crazy. I can only imagine how terrifying it must have been for the people on board. Did they say what caused the crash?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. The investigation is still ongoing, but initial reports suggest that strong winds may have played a role in the accident. The pilots were warned about 38 miles per hour wind gusts as they approached the airport, and it's possible that this contributed to the plane's loss of control.
Okay, that makes sense, I think. So what about the passengers? What was going through their minds during the crash?
From what we've heard from eyewitness accounts, it was absolute chaos. One passenger described being hanging like bats as the plane flipped over, and others reported seeing flames and smoke filling the cabin. It's a testament to the bravery of the passengers and crew that they were able to evacuate the plane so quickly.
Um, I can only imagine. It's like something out of a movie. Did anyone have any particularly harrowing experiences?
Yes, actually, one passenger, Peter Carlson, described the scene as cement and metal and said that everyone on the plane came together to help each other escape. It's amazing to hear about the camaraderie and resilience of the passengers in the face of such a traumatic event.
That's that's really powerful. And what about the airport? How did they respond to the crash?
Well, the airport was shut down for several hours with over 200 flights canceled or diverted. The authorities did an excellent job of responding to the emergency, and it's a credit to their training and preparedness that no one was seriously injured.
Right. Right. That makes sense. So, what does this mean for air travel safety? Are we going to see any changes in regulations or protocols as a result of this crash?
That's a great question. The investigation will likely lead to some recommendations for improved safety measures, possibly including updated aircraft design standards or more stringent wind guidelines for pilots. We'll have to wait and see what the official report says, but one thing is certain, this incident will prompt a reevaluation of current safety protocols.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's not like we can just, how do you say it? Fix the weather, right?
Laughs, exactly. But what we can do is learn from incidents like this and work towards creating a safer, more resilient air travel system. And that's what we'll be exploring in more detail as we continue this conversation.
Okay, got it. So what's the next step? Are we going to be looking at specific examples of how airlines can improve their safety records?
Absolutely. We'll be diving into some case studies and expert analysis to see what lessons can be learned from this incident and how they can be applied to the broader aviation industry. It's going to be a fascinating conversation, and I'm excited to share it with our listeners. Next up, we're discussing the recent Delta plane crash in Toronto and its potential economic impact on the airline industry. I'm your host, and today we're going to dive into the financial consequences of this incident and what it might mean for the future of aviation safety. We're calling this episode Crash Landing: The Economic Fallout.
That's a great topic. So, just to get us started, can you explain how a crash like this could affect Delta's bottom line? I mean, are we talking millions or tens of millions of dollars in losses?
Well, it's difficult to estimate exactly, but consider this: the crash has already led to over 200 flight cancellations and diversions, which means lost revenue for Delta and other affected airlines. Not to mention the cost of repairing or replacing the damaged aircraft, which could be upwards of $10 million to $20 million.
Wow, that's a significant amount. And what about the broader economic impact on the region? I mean, Toronto Pearson is one of the busiest airports in North America, so how does this affect local businesses and travelers?
Exactly. The ripple effects are already being felt. With flights grounded or delayed, that means lost productivity for business travelers, not to mention the impact on tourism and local commerce. According to some estimates, the Toronto airport generates over $40 billion in economic activity each year, so even a short-term disruption can have significant consequences.
Right, pauses. And what about the potential long-term effects? I mean, could this incident lead to increased regulations or safety measures that might drive up costs for airlines?
Great question. If regulators do impose new requirements or stricter guidelines, that could lead to significant expenses for airlines, which would likely be passed on to consumers in the form of higher ticket prices.
That's interesting. Pauses. So, it's kind of a catch-22, right? On one hand, you want to ensure safety, but on the other hand, you don't want to drive up costs and make air travel less accessible. How do airlines balance those competing interests?
Exactly. It's a delicate balance. Airlines need to prioritize safety, of course, but they also need to remain competitive in a crowded market. One possible solution is for governments and regulators to invest more in airport infrastructure and safety measures rather than placing the burden solely on the airlines.
Excitedly. Oh, I just thought of something. What about the potential impact on airline stocks? I mean, could this incident lead to a broader sell-off in the sector?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, we've already seen some volatility in airline stocks following the crash. Investors are likely to be watching this situation closely, and if there are any signs of increased regulation or significant financial losses, that could lead to a wider market reaction.
Interrupting. Right. Pauses. And what about the role of technology in all this? I mean, could advances in aviation tech help prevent similar incidents in the future?
Great point. Technology is already playing a significant role in improving aviation safety, from advanced weather forecasting to more sophisticated aircraft monitoring systems. If we can leverage those technologies to reduce the risk of accidents, that would be a major step forward.
Excitedly. Yeah. And maybe this incident will accelerate investment in those areas. I mean, it's like when you have a near miss or a close call, it can be a wake-up call for the industry to prioritize safety and innovation.